It was 1981 and I, almost a virgin, was pouring pints in jeans so tight it made laughing dangerous. I'd just come from Melbourne and I knew as much about working in a Scottish pub as Liz Truss did about economics. I knew nothing about drink. A piss up at my home was sharing the trifle. I was 11 when my mum gave me the sex talk that scared the living orgasm out of me. I was so frightened of losing my virginity I couldn't use a tampon. It was the early 70s. Germaine Greer was burning a bra, talking about vaginas, and my mum was scared I'd join her. Her sex advice was, don't do it until you're married. She had no idea about sex. She thought anal had something to do with constipation, a blowjob had something to do with balloons, orgasms were things under a microscope, and wank was dyslexic for Frank. You ever wondered why cats' bottoms are different, she said. Like it was the most natural thing in the world to stare at a cat's ass. Even at 11, I knew that was not only weird to look at a cat's backside, but to call it a bottom? Mum began to explain the difference between a male and a female cat's bottom, like she was explaining the theory of gravity, and I couldn't even spell the word. Men are like unneutered cats, tomcats, she said, spraying their seeds everywhere, which made me look at my dad in a whole new way. You could get pregnant in a cinema, she said. Lose your virginity jumping off a bed. Then Dad started talking about town bikes and how we all wanted a new one for Christmas. Something no one else has ridden, he said. I didn't even have a bike. I had a hand-painted scooter Dad pulled from the skip with no brakes. Stopping that bastard required shoes of steel. I did have a few teenage fumbles in the cinema. I slogged my way through The Man with a Golden Gun, had a sandy fling on the beach with a man who lived up to the myth that all dark men have big penises. It was so big it had me running back to the hotel, drowning the sight in a lukewarm Diet Coke. The chances of that tree trunk fitting into my insides was as possible as parking a lorry into a Wendy house. You could hang your week's washing on it. I finally met a young man in a local supermarket where I worked after school. He was a master of shelf-stack packing, with a manageable sized penis and very few words. And he had a car. He tried to deflower me in more ways than you could skin a cat. Your cream egg and my flake are just made for each other, he said. He did spend a lot of time in the chocolate aisles of the supermarket. His patter was pish, just like his fumblings. Keeping my virginity was as easy as resisting a bag of licorice all sorts. I dreamed of a sex life where I didn't have to come home to my mum and dad's frigging bike talk, of a man that knew what he was doing, and I thought I'd find it in Scotland. So there I was, pouring pints in front of two farmers, stouts frothing up like a pubescent wank, when in he walked, a Scottish bit of rough, a poor man's Braveheart. Before I had time to shout freedom, he was behind the bar sorting out my pints, and I was panting like something out of a porn film. And when he said fuck before almost everything, my heart melted. I had met a true rebel, a man that could shock the very roots of my mother's highlights. Swearing to her was oh hell. You fancy a fucking date, he said. How could I refuse? I pictured candlelights, roses, laughter, us smearing ourselves in haggis. The next day, I was squelching across a field, knee-deep in mud, sheep scattering like snooker balls. He was chasing sheep like I wasn't there. It was as seductive as a plate of fish and chips. I mean, what man chases sheep? He picked me up in a four-wheel drive so high I had to do the splits to get in, took one look at my killer slingbacks and threw me a pair of wellies. And before I had time to slip the wellies on, he was off like it was some sort of Olympic race. And then I saw it. A lamb hanging from a sheep's backside. Thank God I listened to my mum. I was gobsmacked. I mean, I'm from the suburbs of Melbourne. The only wildlife I've seen was a stuffed chicken on Christmas Day. I had no idea where lambs came from, let alone what a shepherd was. I just thought they had something to do with Christmas and baby Jesus. I watched as he wrestled her to the ground, pulled the shit lamb out like he was pulling off a sock, and he swung it around like this. Then he threw it to the ground and said it's not breathing. And he gave it mouth to mouth. There was no snogging that night, but I didn't make him dinner. His flat was like a shed with an ensuite, full of tools. The only thing I found in the kitchen was a red penknife by the sink. I peeled the potatoes with it and the mince, thinking of my Mel Gibson, who had saved sheep, and what he was going to do with me after. The next morning, I woke, liberated by orgasms and the joy of no mother to face. I was living the dream. I was having noisy sex, shagging a sheep shagger. Saver, I mean. I even fed him some mince. My cream egg was oozing with joy. She'd finally found her flake. Then I heard a sheep in the yard below. I looked out the window. The ground was covered in sheep shit. Hard, soft, runny, pebble-besh. And there, skidding across, like a god across the clouds, shuffling sheep like cards in a deck, was the man I gave my virginity to. Well, so I told him. He pulled the sheep's back leg up like he was pulling off a sock. He stared at the hoof. It was covered in enough shit to block a toilet. I sighed. He dug into his pocket. Oh, so dexterous. The sheep didn't move. Oh, so masterful. Then he pulled it out. The knife. He pulled it out. And he went like this. And this. And I married the fucker.